Mm, 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 Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller Trademarks training video live broadcast out on YouTube to you because you're watching. Thank you. Meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates. Thank you even more. And the Core New Core. And anyone interested in surviving as a Pilates instructor. Of course, depending on what you mean by Pilates. And anyone interested in core new tension, which my trademark points to. Core new tension is just a biomechanical means of engagement that we employ either subconsciously or better, more consciously to influence our ability to move through space. Okay? So, today's broadcast, that's so much going on. I have three topics in my broadcast today. And the first one, how do I say this better, is in the form of a question. And the question is, why is all of this old footage showing up of Joe? And to me, over the last 30 plus years, there's been more of the old footage of Joe released recently than at any other point in my involvement and observation of Pilates culture. So why now, right? And that's part of looking behind the curtain. And why now? Well, all of what you see coming of old footage of Joe is attached to a brand, right? So it's because it's being released by a particular place, they're claiming credit for it, and claiming credit for it, makes it a situation that it's up to you to determine what message that sends. Because a lot of people don't have a lot of footage that has come out recently, and when I see particular geographical locations being the source of so much original footage of Joe branded with their put out from them, right? There's a good point to this. There's a good point to this. One way of looking at it is that it's definitely a statement of authority or prestige or having possession of something that you don't, and thereby establishing themselves as an authority by merely having possession of and the ability to share that footage. Okay? So it's a statement of power in having what others don't. Now, if you're familiar with my workshop puzzle exercise, I've made the point for years that once you understand, once you at least know the point of view of MMP, that it's an ideal, and you know the basis of what that is, uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement, you can not only lay that ideal on what you see that's new, that's made up from anybody not Joe, but you can also look at new footage of Joe, like Joe in a bathtub demonstrating his aqua apparatus, and in looking at it and seeing the film, you can judge for yourself based on the ideal whether or not the film acknowledges or contradicts the ideal that you already knew about. And see, the point is that at some level, if someone's showing off what they have of Joe, it's very nice of them, and thank you, and maybe all the vested intentions, but the fact of the matter is, it makes you a exemplar of authority. But only to the extent that they have access to archival information that you don't. I got sued once over what I had on the internet, and my parting remark was that after they lost the suit, all they would have are some artifacts in the attic. And see, that's true for all of us. We all have artifacts in the attic. And there's this whole, okay, so my end of number one comment was, I think that the release of all this really precious old footage of Joe is done by wherever it's being done. But see, that's part of it, half of it, is speculating on why it's happening. And for me, it's an effort to establish authority and control and a significance and a presence by releasing footage of Joe that barely anybody else has. But in doing that, there are only so many artifacts in the attic. And there will always be the assertion that there is something in the attic, and there will always be, in my opinion, given human nature, there will always be part of humanity that wants to believe that there will always be a mystery unsolved or something yet to learn, but only in a realm that you want to learn it in. So, number two takes me to puppy love Pilates. And I don't mean any disrespect. I mean it for you to help you survive as a Pilates instructor, to recognize the culture that you're in and the stage of the Pilates tsunami of passion that we're experiencing. Okay? And for anyone, anywhere in the world, their personal love affair with Pilates goes through phases, I think, like any love affair does. And I'm fortunate enough to see some social media go by, and wouldn't otherwise, where it's more than just an individual, but I think whole cultures being exposed to the Pilates culture, that I see the anguish, as I expressed it, the anguish of expectations. You fall in love with Pilates and it immediately builds up expectations about how Pilates ought to be and what you want of it, right? And what you consider it to be. And then another word that came up in this puppy love Pilates stages is indignation. How could it not be the way I believe it to be, and my passion tells me it is? The indignation of experiencing difference and from intolerance and closed-mindedness and the presumption that your opinion matters more than someone else's, you fall into indignation, or I can, or anybody can, and I see indignation. How can there be politics? And why aren't we just talking and focusing about the people doing it? Well, that's a good question, but it's a to survive as a Pilates instructor, I think you have to at least be aware of the political arena that you participate in. Some call that the Pilates court, right? Like the court of old, but it's where the players are and the shakers are, and those people that seek something, for whatever reason, they participate in the court. Now, in the feeding frenzy that happens in this, I'm mixing metaphors, in this tsunami of passion, you know, on a calm day, when little fish in groups all jump out of the water, and then over there they jump out of the water. Why is that? They're trying to fly? Well, yes, in a way, but from my assumption, they're trying to escape something else. They're trying to survive. To survive. And so. To be a Pilates instructor and to do what you're there to do, you have to be able to participate in the political arena that either will or won't let you do what you want to do. So you have to be certified, and in many places you have to belong to the union. And in many places all of that means you surrender what you already know about the ideal within Joe's original work, if you're a student of mine. And that ideal is an experience that gives you a direct relationship to Joe through his method. And that everything else is folderol. I wonder if I'm using that word rightly. Folderol. But as your instructor, I put to you a question for you to offer whatever response, if any, to it all. But to me, Pilates is more than idolizing the man, idolizing his art, idolizing his method. Well, see, it's not about idolization. It's about a common man giving another common man a means to survive. And I said that all man by man, but better politically correct, I would be saying, one human being. Look at that human being. And you can talk about all of the network of influences that his life represented, but his life became the synthesis of a word that everybody makes 10,000 impressions of. Right? And to see such precious archival footage being dished out there in video bites from a particular source that gains the obvious notoriety, and maybe it's just envy. you know, but if I envied what they're getting, I would have done what I could have done decades ago. So this whole thing of promoting yourself while you can for what you've got, I think, is part of an indication of the pressure to survive and to distinguish yourself among everybody else, and that you play the best cards you've got in order to do that. And in the pressure to survive, we see really rare and toward the end of what's out there, I think what's in existence, being available. And that's just my opinion, but if that is accurate, that the old footage and what's really out there, it's been accurate for a while now, you know. What's out there is available of Joe's original stuff, then to what extent is the leverage of promising having stuff that's not out there and not being able to produce anything new deteriorate your presumption of authority based on the relics that you have in the attic? And if that's all I had, I might be resorting to that, but it's never come to that for me. What matters to me, again, I'm saying again, is look at the new stuff and see if it reaffirms what you already know about the ideal or not. And I'm a big believer that anything, I have faith. So that's where faith comes in. Anything new that you find, that I have faith that it will match the ideal within everything else that's already there. And my point is this totally rare footage of Joe demonstrating his aqua gym. I mean, can you hear the equipment manufacturers now that weren't aware of the aqua gym, didn't even know it existed? And even those that sort of did but didn't realize, man, this is, you watch. If patents aren't in the work, there are immediate patents being filed yesterday to try to corner the market on Joe's aqua gym. You watch. But see, okay, to the Pilates instructor, the commercialization of the apparatus doesn't really matter, because it's when you walk into a situation where someone is asking you to teach Pilates in that environment, even without having seen Joe's original video, you would have applied what you know from the ideal and perhaps everything else, but the ideal is there in structure in Joe's original video. And that takes me to number 3, Pilates theory. I just finished Nick Herbert's book on quantum reality, and read the word theory a lot in that. It's not everybody's reading, it's about quantum reality, quantum physics, and the quantum reality pointed to by 8 different points of view, and no one that's an obvious front runner in the contention of which way reality really is. But what I had to love about it is that the observer is plays such an intricate role in our interpretation of reality. Seems to me, from what's there on paper, and so that had me, of course, applying or wanting to look at Pilates theory. And a theory, by definition, is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. And so, Michael Miller Pilates represents a Pilates theory. And basically the one idea that there is an ideal within the original work. And that, and so MMP is an attempt to explain something. It's different and unique in that it's not an attempt to participate in a traditional passage of information through a lineage of who knew Joe and what generation you are from somebody that knew Joe. Understand? And I don't understand why others haven't seen the necessity yet in addressing Pilates theory as a means to surviving beyond just releasing old footage of Joe. See? And when they discuss or define, when they get to, in the definition of theory, that's the definition of, what's the definition of theory? A theory is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something. I'm trying to explain the original work of Joe, especially based on general principles. Well, you know, if we just give honor and credibility to Freeman and Eisen, who wrote the Pilates method of physical and mental conditioning, it's been their general principles that have supported the expression of Pilates. And I always go by control first because that's what Joe named his method. And then coming from the center, 3 C's in a row. Oh no, I say it wrong. Concentration. Because Joe said without concentration, everything else is futile. Right? And then control, because that's the name of his method. And then coming from the center. So concentration, because that's, and see, what is concentration? It's listening. It's being in touch with sensational input. It's being the observer in that. And being part of the thinking and the body's effort to do the choreography. But the theory, the interpretation of the choreography, MMP is just one out of 10,000 different ways of looking at Pilates. But it's pointing to an ideal, and at some point the ideal becomes apparent enough to you as the instructor that you don't need any additional information or evidence to for you to hold your faith in that belief. Based on what you already know, based on what you've already seen. The rare footage that comes out of the woodwork for whatever reason, I'm there as your instructor pointing to what you see the movement is. And is the movement consistent with the ideal? Uniform eccentric loading flowing through a progressive pattern of movement. And in case you haven't seen the discussion, or this is way after the fact, my question on the release of the video was, besides just the confirmation of the ideal within the work, why is in the water different than what it would be not in the water? And for me, first off, or most importantly, it's a loading issue, because the whole response to effort is the body to move through space. And on land, it's the body to survive on land. And that means being able to carry your weight, an old phrase, and unable to carry your weight, you would still want the same progressive pattern of movement. You would still want, and you'd want all of it, but you just change the loading aspect of the implementation of the method. But and where would you go from what Joe shows? For what you see Joe do? Well, you would continue with progressive patterns of movement, and you'd flow through them to capture the observer, the capacity of spirit in the human, so you can bet that manufacturers that were unaware of this before this recent release of Joe in the tub using an aqua reformer, the licensing for names, can you hear it? There's nothing to hear but the swinging door, because everyone that's got a financial interest in manufacturing equipment and already does is way behind the curve if they don't already have a product where they can say, ta-da, here it is in our next catalog. And even that might be a schematic of what has no existence to it other than what you need for the trademark office. So, for whatever else is out there, I want you to understand that MMP is a theory of Pilates. It's a way to explain Joe's original work, based on principles: control, concentration, centering, precise, flowing motion that rides within the breath. Is the way I cover all of those principles in Freeman and Eisen's book, because they're real, but they're only the extract when you twist the rope of ideal. And it's possible to, in my opinion, understand theory to where you don't need old footage or promise of old footage. And that's not that in the fact that you don't care about what's in the attic, it transcends your authority, because what you know won't be influenced by anything coming out of the attic. And if it is, it's more likely, and now more than ever, to be a hoax. Right? All right, so that was my three things. Theory. Oh, and paradoxes. All right, so I encourage you to learn all you can about Joe from anyone that knew him and anyone that's a scholar on Joe. It doesn't matter. But the idolatry of a person, or holding a person as an idol, and we all have idols, right? Joe's an idol of mine. But it's much more than that for me. That's my point. Joe is more than an idol. He's the heart. He's the He's the deliverer of the experience. He's the He's the deliverer of his method. It's not complicated, but there's the man and there's the method. And so much of the whole Pilates culture is idolatrous in a way that never even contemplates beyond that. But in my world, to survive as a Pilates instructor, it pays to understand the ideal so that you don't feel anybody has something in the attic that will subjugate your knowledge of what you stand on. You follow that? And then the person that has all this stuff in the attic is going to want to know what you have, rather than because you don't care. See? Knowledge is a powerful thing, and understanding is a powerful thing. And being able to say, well, I understand that MMP is just a point of view. You know, it doesn't have to be more than that. It doesn't have to. But in understanding the point of view, it gives you a context to evaluate not only everything else that everybody's making up on the fly as we live through life, but all the old stuff, even though there's not that much old, and it's so remarkable that it seems there has to be pressure behind the curtain, right? To release such rare archival information. I have no understanding of why, but only use what I can point to, anyone can see, and in my own vanity, can't you see what I've been professing all along about the ideal, and how what Joe's movements are in the tub mirror the ideal. And the rest of his work, of course, because all of his work is coherent. Right? Right? And so, on the fly right now, when you put an aqualung on, so that you don't have to be above the surface, your imagination goes wild with the implementation of Pilates submerged, and to what extent you're submerged, and to what extent the apparatus mirrors the old, and to what extent the environment calls on the new. Same thing as space, right? So, all right. Life can't live forever. Read between the lines. Because always it comes to that, it's you that has to decide. See behind the curtain. It's you that has to decide. Add 2 and 2. When you get an answer, does that make sense? The one thing I took away from my college exposure was asking yourself, does that make sense? Add 2 and 2. And then direct your thinking. Position yourself. And know how others are positioning themselves. That's part of see behind the curtain. Recognize the writing on the curtain. Okay? And then always about Geist.